Welcome back to MOVI-C Control Cabinet Products Basic to Intermediate Training. This is session number 6. Glad to see you back. This is our last information download presentation. Then we'll be shifting gears and moving into the hands-on component of this class. We really just have one more thing we need to cover, and that is we need to do a brief overview of MOVISUITE, the software that you'll be using throughout the rest of this course to work with our products. Let me introduce MOVISUITE with a big idea. MOVISUITE provides multiple paths to many tasks and tools. In other words, this can be both beneficial and confusing. Essentially, as the expression goes, all roads lead to Rome, and that's kind of the same thing with MOVISUITE. It almost doesn't matter where you go, you tend to wind up in the same general area, which makes it very easy to find things. But it does also mean that it can be a little confusing at first. I'm hoping that this overview will help you, and the first activity we do will really get you grounded in being comfortable with MOVISUITE. Let me introduce a very important concept that's really the heart of MOVISUITE, and that is something called axis circles. Most tasks that you work with take place around the axis circle. This is a MOVI-Drive technology axis circle. Every component in a MOVI-C system that you access through MOVISUITE tends to appear as a circle associated with a particular device. In this case, we're connected just to a MOVI-Drive technology. There's nothing else connected. So we have a little circle. You see that on the left side. That's the project itself we've created. But then the VFD has the axis circle. Now, if you get into a bigger system like a MOVI-Drive modular that has a whole bunch of access modules, each individual access module has its own axis circle. But when you're working with a single VFD like we're doing, there's really just one. So tasks revolve around these. You'll be spending a lot of time with them. So be aware these can be individual VFDs or MOVI-Drive modular access modules. Also be aware in a controller-based system, there will be a controller circle, and it's up at a higher level. In fact, if you look down there at the bottom, those are two access modules connected to the controller. So it's almost like you have the project circle, which leads to the controller circle, and below that are access circles. So there's kind of a hierarchy, and everything is graphically depicted so you can see the relationships. That's really kind of the neat thing about MOVISUITE. It shows you how all the pieces relate to each other. And in a big, complicated system, that's really nice. In a small single VFD system, it's probably not so important just because things are pretty obvious. But do be aware of that. These circles are really kind of the heart of the picture. Another thing to understand is all axis circles are more or less alike. There are some variations in what's visible, but once you've seen one, you kind of understand them all. Let me also give you another significant truth. I've already sort of alluded to this, but I'm going to say it again because it's important. It really doesn't matter where you click in these different places. I've put a bunch of arrows here showing clickable places. They pretty much all go to the same spot, which is convenient because you really don't have to try to remember what goes where. You just click and you tend to wind up in a recognizable place that you can then figure out from there where to go. So with this particular access circle, which is part of a MOVI-Drive technology, you can click that top sector there that says drivetrains, or the side one that says diagnostics, or the bottom one that says functions, or you can click the upper section of the circle itself that looks like a little MOVI-Drive technology. Every one of those pretty much will take you to the same place. Now, what are all the little squares, like the one I pointed to here labeled inputs and outputs? These are just shortcuts. They take you to a specific menu. But the advantage is you don't have to use them if you don't want. If you go to the general menu structure, you can find these things very easily. But if you're looking to go to a specific place with just one click, click the squares because they're the shortcuts. Now, almost no matter what you click will take you to this. This is the main menu structure. This is the place you set parameters, you make changes, you work with the drive. And I'm going to outline what these different areas are, but when you get your hands on this in our first lab activity, I think you're just going to really click with this. But let's just overview it. If you click kind of near the center of the access circle, you'll come really to the top part of the menu. That involves things dealing with the device itself, so usually one of those menus will be activated. If you click the top section, the top quadrant I call it, you'll be connected with the menus labeled drivetrains. If you click the bottom area, you'll tend to wind up with the menus labeled functions, and if you click on the right, you'll come up on diagnostics. But as I say, you will always see all these menus anyway, so really all you're doing is maybe saving yourself one click. You wind up in the same general place all the time. Now, when you click those little squares, they take you to these specific menus. The shortcuts go directly to these. Remember, I pointed out the inputs, outputs shortcut square? Well, if you click that, it will go to the inputs, outputs menu under functions, and it just takes you there directly. Again, it just saves you a click. It's not really vital, but when you're in a hurry and you're trying to get a lot of work done, knowing how to go directly to things is helpful. Finally, if you click that back arrow, it goes back to the access circle. So that is really all the navigation you need to understand to use MOVISUITE. MOVISUITE is really a very simple piece of software that's very intuitive. There's just one area that if you click, it's different, and it's black there so you can tell it's different. It's the Tools section. If you click that quadrant, instead of going to the main menu structure, a little pop-out appears, and it contains several useful things. And there may be more things on the list, but in just basic out-of-the-box mode, you'll see these three: compare, manual mode, and scope. Manual mode is something we'll be using right away. It's extremely helpful because it lets you test that your motor just turns. And that is very helpful because that at least confirms your wiring is correct. So these are some tools that you can pop up and use. Now, some more big ideas. What you see when you go to an access circle can sometimes vary a little bit. If you add expansion devices, there may be some extra shortcuts or menus that appear. Or if you remove a piece of hardware, something may change. So the appearance will vary a little bit depending what hardware is installed in your system, but the overall look remains the same. Also, I'll just mention this. There are some hidden modes that can be activated or deactivated by entering magic codes. SEW-EURODRIVE employees sometimes use these to do specialized tasks, and they will activate this. Go in there, that'll turn on extra menus or extra options, but out of the box, those will be hidden. We don't always give those out to people. If you're an SEW customer, some of those we do reserve because if they get turned on, you can really get into trouble using them. But if you're an SEW employee and you work in certain specialized areas, then you may be using the hidden modes, or someone may tell you those, and they will enable you to do certain things. All right, it doesn't cripple functionality or anything, but it does put things out of sight that you can stumble into and get in trouble. Let's just take a quick tour of a MOVI-Drive Technologies access circle, just to kind of give you an idea what all the bits and pieces do. All right, these top links here are shortcuts to drivetrains. Now you notice we have two of them. There's drivetrain DT1 and optimization DT1, and then drivetrain DT2 and optimization DT2. What's that all about? It's very simple. We have given you the opportunity to operate a MOVI-Drive technology with either a single motor being run in two different ways, or two motors that are selected between a switch that have different requirements. Each drivetrain is like a set of configurations for a motor. And there are some applications customers do where they either need to switch the behavior of the motor or they have two motors, they're only running one at a time with a selector switch, but they're different. So this is just some flexibility we give you. Many people never use this function, so in that case, just ignore drivetrain number 2, just use number 1. Now, you're probably thinking, what is a drivetrain? That doesn't make sense. Tell me what a drivetrain is. Well, it's this. A drivetrain is everything necessary to work with the motor. Now, obviously, that includes a motor, but it includes possibly some other things. If you have an encoder of some kind, the encoder is part of the drivetrain because it provides feedback. Maybe you have a gearbox attached to it with a ratio. You can add that to the drivetrain and you can key in the gear ratio, and the system will then be able to use that to calculate behavior. Maybe there's some kind of transmission like a sprocket drive. All these things are part of the drivetrain. Now, if you look at the example here, I've shown you a fairly complex drivetrain. There's a servo motor, that's an SEW-EURODRIVE CMP50S, that's the motor. It has a resolver, an RH1M resolver attached to the back. There's an SEW-R37 gearbox with a ratio of 3.41 attached to it that's scaling the output. And then there's a 10-to-1 sprocket drive of some kind, or gear drive, or some kind of transmission that's got 10-to-1. And so it's scaling it. And by providing all those numbers, the MOVI-C system can do calculations. There are other things you can add to drivetrains too. You can create custom units, all sorts of possibilities. And then there's one other thing, which I haven't talked about there. It's the one at the bottom, the control system. That is the algorithm that the VFD is using to control the motor. It's one of those 4 motor control modes, VF, VFC+, CFC, or ELSM. All these things are the drivetrain. And when you commission the drive, when you start it up, you provide a lot of this information. And that configures the drivetrain, and then the system uses that to make things happen. So this is very important. It's important you get comfortable with this. You will definitely be working with the drivetrain when you do your first motor startup, which will be coming pretty soon. All right, what are some of these other shortcuts for? We're going to go through this just very quickly. Status, process values, and fault memory. This gives you information about the VFD, like what its current condition is, how long it's been running, operating hours, info about the encoder, and this is the most important one for diagnostics, fault memory. The VFD remembers the 5 most recent faults and the state of the machine at the instant of failure. So if you have a VFD that keeps faulting for some reason, go to the fault memory. That gives you a snapshot of the 5 most recent faults and a lot of information about what the VFD was reading as the drive faulted. That can be used to solve problems. Very important. Monitoring functions is important too. This is where you set things like limits, how fast the drive can run, for example, its acceleration and deceleration. If the motor has a brake, how does it behave? If you have limit switches, what do they do? This allows you to configure a lot of things about how the system behaves if something goes wrong or if certain events happen. Monitoring functions is often a place you go to right after starting up a drive, because this is kind of where you set your limitations and behaviors. Then we have some very specialized things, technology functions, drive functions, actual values. I'm not going to talk about them much here. These are more like semi-expert settings that are used for specialized applications. Inputs and outputs and set points. This allows you to configure how the digital inputs and outputs behave, what they're supposed to do. It also allows you to set things like fixed set points and acceleration, deceleration, ramp values. You can use these to do very simple control of the drive. If you don't want to use a field bus, for example, you can use the inputs, outputs, and set points to run the drive just as a very basic standalone VFD. We'll be doing a lab where you do that, and you'll see you actually can get a lot of bang for your buck out of just these connections here. But there are many other things that are available here that you'll discover later. If you click the center or the communications shortcut, this allows you to deal with the device itself to get information about it, firmware information, which you might need if you're seeking technical support over the phone. You can find out about setting up the communications. You can reset the VFD back to a delivery state, sort of like what it's like when it comes out of the box brand new. And you can reset some of the counters that are in there that keep track of information that the VFD needs. You can reset those counters. And then finally, the bottom where it says Add Software Module, if you click that part of the circle, you can connect a MOVI-Kit, one of those application modules, to the Access, and that enables you to take advantage of that special application functionality. Right now, there is no MOVI-Kit installed, which is why it's blank there, but you can attach it, and we will certainly be doing that. I'll mention just one other thing. The very center of the circle has the name of the particular VFD. Mine just says MOVI-Drive Technology, but you can change it to any name you like. And in a complicated system, you would probably want to name each individual access with a meaningful name. So that is in there as well. MOVISUITE has a limited number of toolbars and menus. We try to avoid overloading you, so there aren't too many of them, but I do want to point out a few key ones up at the top and bottom of the screen. First of all, if you click the Scan menu, it scans the network to find out what devices are out there. Now, what it can see depends how you're connected. I told you that in the last session. You might just see one device, but if you're connected, say, by Ethernet to a controller, it'll scan the whole Ethernet network and see what devices it can find out there. So this is useful, especially if something changes. You might want to click Scan just to see what else has changed. Configure Communications lets you configure how you're trying to access the MOVI-C devices. This is where you choose between Ethernet, EtherCAT, USB, various other tools. You have two visualization choices here. They are called Tree View and Circle View. It's just two different ways of presenting the information that displays on the screen. People have their preferences. Usually when people are beginners, they use Circle View because it's easier to see and understand. Many engineers who've been doing this for a long time use Tree View because it's more compact. I will be using Circle View because everything's nice and big and easy to see on the video. And if you're watching this on a small screen device like a phone, I want you to be able to read everything. So I'll be using Circle View, but you can change between it. It's purely your preference which you pick. There's no real advantage of one over the other. There is a Network tab, which gives you a more detailed view of the attached devices. I should mention, by the way, that when you see these little kind of sweepy things with names on them, many of those are menus. Click them to see what they do. There's several sweep-type menus at different parts of the screen. Network is one of them. And then there's the More menu, which I like. You click this and it gives you access to almost everything. It pops up this one sort of mega menu with everything you could possibly want to do right there as far as interacting with the software. So it's nice. You really only have to know about More, and that takes you to the majority of places. So we don't overload you with really complicated menus. It's pretty simple. Let me just summarize how you set up communications, since as you already know, there are many ways to communicate with different MOVI devices. All right, when you click the communications button, you'll get a screen like this, and one of the first things you can see is there are a lot of different ways to connect. So you've got to pick the one you want. For example, if you want to connect by Ethernet, you would pick Ethernet. If you want to connect by the EtherCAT S-Bus Plus connection, you would pick EtherCAT/S-Bus Plus. And if you're using one of the USB methods, either a cable to the keypad or the USM21A adapter, you would pick USB. So first thing you do, choose an adapter. Now, based on which adapter you choose, you're going to get a slightly different screen to the right of that. This is the Ethernet screen that's appeared here. And there are lots of useful buttons. You can pick the PC Network Control Panel button. This will pop up your Windows Ethernet adapter screen to let you configure your adapter if you need to. There's also an on-off switch that activates or deactivates using your PC's Ethernet port. And you notice there are actually a lot of different adapters. The computer I did this on had several Ethernet connections, and it had Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, so all of those were there. But the one I'm using was the first Ethernet adapter, the one whose switch is turned on. So if you have several Ethernet ports, or you're using like an Ethernet dongle connected to a USB port, you may have to search through and pick the correct one. So you'll have to select an adapter. If you're using the USM21A or the keypad, though, pick USB. That is what we're using for the labs in this class. So that's the one you'll be using all the time. Pick that and you're pretty much good to go. USB is pretty much just turn it on and use it. Ethernet's a little more complicated. Let me give you one useful setting that you should use with MOVISUITE. You need to change this from the default. I think it makes MOVISUITE easier to use. This is the main MOVISUITE screen, and I'm pointing out another one of those little sweep menus. It's the MOVISUITE tab that's red. Click this, and this will pop up a tab list of some choices. And what I would suggest you do is click the settings one, the one that looks like a gear. You'll get this choice here, and there are two switches. Always start with last project and show start screen. And I would strongly urge you to turn this switch off. It's by default on. Now, if it's on, it will always revert to the last project that you did. Now, if you're a programmer for one single company, that might be useful. But if you work in the field and you're servicing lots of different people's systems, you really don't want to go to the last project you did because that's probably some other company's project. So what this will do when you turn that switch off basically ensures that MOVISUITE always starts up with a clean slate. And if you're doing lots of different projects, that's what you really want. So turn the switch off, that'll put you in clean slate mode, then just click apply and you're good to go. That's just my personal preference, but I think it's a good one for common applications. And I'm going to show you one final thing and we're done, and then we're going to be moving into the labs at long last. How do you find documentation? Well, of course, you can go to SEW-EURODRIVE's website and download PDFs, but there's also an even quicker way for certain things. If you right-click in the upper section of the access circle where the arrow's pointing, you'll get a menu, and at the very bottom is an option, Documents. And what this will do if you pick this is give you a list of every PDF document that SEW-EURODRIVE thinks applies to this particular device, which would be manuals connected with the software and device that you're working with. And you can see the first choice here is the MOVISUITE manual, so they're assuming maybe you need help with MOVISUITE, and then there will be a list of other things. I will warn you, occasionally the list will have some German in there. I should mention that with SEW, we're a German company, and we do our very best to translate everything to English, but sometimes things get missed, and you'll find bits of German. That is just life at SEW-EURODRIVE, and we all joke about it at work, but sometimes you'll see German names and German words instead. Don't forget, Google Translate can translate German words for you if you're really stuck. We try to fix those things, but they happen. So in this case, that second choice there is a manual in German, which might not be terribly helpful. It is what it is. Anyway, that said, we are at the end of session number 6. We've now exposed you to the products, to the software, and all the big ideas. We will now be moving into doing a series of labs. I'll explain how labs work, where you can download the lab instructions for you to do, and then I will be going through them myself and demonstrating them, so if you don't have a demo unit, at least you'll have the advantage of seeing the labs happen. And if you do the labs and you get stuck, then that should unstick you. So, ready to get our hands on it last? Get your demo unit ready and operable. So see you later.